Hello and welcome to Financial Intelligence. In this video, I want to talk about how inflation exacerbates wealth inequality. Contrary to popular belief, the inflation rate is not uniform for different households. The impact of inflation on each household depends on the composition of its expenses as well as the type of assets owned by that household. Lower and middle class households are generally confronted with higher than average inflation in comparison to upper class families. That is because they spend a larger percentage of their income on products and services that are disproportionately impacted by inflation. Unfortunately, lower and middle class families also do not own many assets that could act as a hedge against rising inflation. I'm going to share with you reasons as to why inflation inequality exists and explore how inflation is a form of regressive taxation which leads to more income and wealth inequality. In the final part of this video, I'm going to discuss how political institutions are unlikely to resolve inflation inequality. If you like the type of content that I provide, subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up, and also hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my future videos. Part 1. Inflation inequality. Inflation is defined as the increase in prices of goods and services over time. Sadly, income inequality and rising inflation can entrap lower income households in poverty. This is because research has shown that prices rise more quickly for those who have lower incomes, a phenomenon called inflation inequality. Prior to the pandemic, despite sputtering wages, rising rents, and healthcare costs, the American working class had some breathing room financially because other stuff, relatively speaking, remained cheap. Thanks to big box stores, internet retailers, and imports from abroad, food and beverages, apparel, transportation, and other goods and services were affordable for the most part. However, the recent wave of higher inflation has entirely changed the economic environment. After the pandemic, low-income families are getting squeezed not just by the rising costs of rent and healthcare, but by the costs of just about everything. A large part of the inflation inequality turns out to be due to the most volatile price of all, which is the gasoline prices. Because they spend a relatively large part of their income on gas, low-income households seem to be particularly hard hit in terms of inflation when gasoline prices spike. Moreover, higher gasoline prices also translate into increased costs of transportations for products, putting upward pressure on the prices of essential goods such as food and beverages, apparel, and household equipment. Since low-income families spend a larger portion of their budget on essential goods, they are confronted with higher than average inflation, leading to inflation disparity. Part 2. Inflation is regressive taxation. Printing money raises revenue for the government by devaluing the currency. When the currency is intentionally devalued, a proportion of any wealth held in nominal assets such as cash is in effect transferred from the citizens to the government. Simply put, inflation is a hidden tax imposed on the public. But not all people face the same inflation tax rate. Inflation is a regressive taxation, meaning that it is a tax that hits the poor and middle class hardest because they hold more nominal assets as a fraction of their total income than the wealthy. For instance, most lower and middle class families earn fixed salaries and own fewer hard assets. Therefore, whenever the currency is devalued, the real value of their total income decreases by the rate of inflation. On the other hand, people with higher incomes who have alternative income sources such as rental properties or businesses can increase the rents and prices to offset the impact of rising inflation. Note that this is not an option for working class families. This means that the wealthy can mostly avoid the inflation tax because their revenue streams from investments in businesses and real estate are more resilient to the adverse effect of inflation compared to fixed wages. The bottom line is that inflation is a hidden tax which impacts low-income families more heavily than the rich ones. Part 3. Political power inequality. Big money dominates US political campaigns to a degree not seen in decades. Super PACs allow billionaires to pour unlimited amounts into campaigns, drowning out the voices of ordinary Americans. Races for congressional seats regularly attract tens of millions of dollars in spending. It is no wonder that most people believe that super wealthy have much more influence than the rest of us. My point is that where democratic institutions are less effective, some groups will carry more weight than the others. US political campaigns are all about donors and their contributions. But if political voice depends on income, then greater inequality means greater inequality in political participation. What this means is that wealth inequality increases the adoption of policies such as inflation more favorable to the wealthy. It creates a vicious cycle, and these policies are unlikely to be overturned as long as political power inequality persists. I hope that you liked this video. If you have any recommendation or suggestion, add them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel, and also hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my future videos. Thank you and take care.